Bonjour, bonjour. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I know this is a little bit of a last minute adjustment. I believe a lot of people were anticipating Dr. Bryce. Unfortunately, something popped up and he's not able to be here, but I have the privilege and pleasure. We're marrying words today. I have the privilege and pleasure of stepping in with the most magnanimous Dr. Lara to support this evening's most delightful conversation around the genetics of longevity and hopefully demystifying that. Because I think personally, when I heard the title, I was like, oh goodness, this is going to be a long thesis of a night. But as Dr. Lara and I chatted and prepared for this session, I think uh, she in particular, but we both have some really strong insights to offer that hopefully can take such a very daunting thing like longevity and genetics and all the glorious little parts and pieces that go into it and humanize it a little bit for you this evening. So I guess I'll introduce myself and also the little critter that has decided to introduce herself as well. For those listening, we all know I'm completely subservient to two cats. This is one of them. This is Nepeta. My name is Dr. Krista. I'm a naturopathic doctor and I'm the Chief Scientific Officer here at the DNA Company. I'm going to allow Dr. Lara in just one moment to introduce herself. I just want to orient us a little bit to today's time. So we'll be together for about an hour today discussing all things longevity, hopefully offering you with some very tangible takeaways as to if my goal is to be living longer and better, right? Really emphasis on that quality of life piece. Here are things that maybe I could take away from this session. That's the goal that we have put out for us today. And we'll be doing that. We're going to talk between Dr. Lara and myself for approximately 40 minutes, and we'll allow the last 20 minutes or so to be questions and answers. So I really, really encourage you to make use of the question and answer part, as well as the chat section. When we were waiting for that first 5 minutes for everyone to collect, we put a question out there to you, and I'd really encourage you to spend a few seconds reading through that poll. Really, when it comes to what do you think of, what comes first to mind, what motivates you most when it comes to aging. And we'd love, as Dr. Lara, as I am chatting now, as we're speaking in the next few minutes, for you to fill that out, because the goals of these sessions are to be very interactive, to support you to understand what you're seeking to know. And so if we know that 95% of the audience is here today, for example, to talk about concerns around mobility, we'll almost exclusively focus on that. We want to understand what you guys are here to understand, what the concerns that you have are, so we can speak to them best. So please, I'm going to pass the mic over to Dr. Lara and let her introduce herself to you. And as she's speaking, as I'm speaking now, please fill this out so we can ground ourselves and learn how to best support you. So Dr. Lara, welcome, welcome, welcome.
Well, hello and glorious day to everyone. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to spend it with us, to continue to learn on your health journey. And really, that is what we are here to do tonight, is continuing to expound the information and to navigate and play with all of this wonderful technologies and the DNA and all of the lovely things that life has to offer, right down to the basicness of breathing. So very important, and things that sometimes we take for granted. And just realizing the importance of the simple things in life. We should never overlook that, because really, when we talk about quality of life, quality of aging, it really comes down to the simple things. So my name is Dr. Lara Varden. I am a holistic health practitioner and functional genomics practitioner and in-house clinician with the DNA Company, here to help you on your journey in learning your DNA and how you can use that to leverage the information and personalize your health journey. So thank you all for being here. And thank you, Dr. Krista. I always love working with you and doing these webinars. So
Likewise,
we will definitely miss Dr. Bryce this evening, but we do thank you that you are here.
Well, I'm grateful to be here. And I wonder if the powers that be can flip the poll to me, because I think before you and I jump into conversation, I want to just check in with the audience and understand what people are hoping to learn. I see Nabil has offered a beautifully general question of how do you stay healthy until a ripe old age? And that's what we endeavor to offer a little bit of light on. Unfortunately, we won't be able to offer all the answers to life other than 42 for the extra thick glasses out there, if anyone knows that reference. But can I just get the results to the poll, please? Oh, 1 second, the computer is magicking. All right. So we asked the question, what comes to mind most when you think about aging? And you know what? We're beautifully mixed across the board. So coming in number one here, cognitive and memory issues. So about 36% of our audience is focused on that. And I think Dr. Lara called that in our pre-call today. She was mentioning, she's like, that's what I anticipate it's going to be. And I think that's something that people hold dear to them. I watched my grandmother kind of age through that in a very difficult way. And it's something I can appreciate the concern there and wanting to address. So I think we will speak to that very directly this evening. Um, there's another happy three-way tie amongst the top three concerns in regards to when they think of aging, they think of being with their family and people they love. They think about time to travel and do things that you love. And then on I guess the less savory side of things, there are concerns about major health events. So hopefully through the course of our conversations here today, we'll be able to touch on each of these elements so that you're able to take away a little bit as to how do you directly support your long-term goals of health and well-being. There was a beautiful 5% here that's saying other, and I'd love if you're one of the others to jump into the chat box and just let us know what that is, so we can ensure that that's covered, or maybe even offer a different session. We'll see how it goes. So Laura, let's kick things off here and let's really talk about, you know, how one goes about demystifying this really big concept of aging. In particular, when we think about aging, there's so many different dimensions to it, right? Health concerns, memory concerns, mobility concerns, right? Let's jump right into it all. And I don't know if you have kind of a place that you like to start off with, but whenever I have conversations with clients or patients around aging, I always ask the question of, what are you going to spend your health on? Like, why are you bothering to be healthy, right? How do your conversations go with your clients?
I often encourage them to really crystallize what their why is. I mean, what is it? What
Mhm.
is making you do the things that you are doing? What is making you, what made you purchase the package to learn this stuff with the DNA?
Mhm.
Because when you know what that motivation is, that is what continues to motivate you. Because a lot of us know, the basics of good health. Let's eat clean, drink good, clean water, get good sleep. And that's wonderful. But that's a very broad, nebulous, sometimes type of a goal. And it's like, well, how do I go about doing that? And when we start
Mhm.
digging in and going, okay, well, looking at your genes, looking at your environment, looking at you and your past traumas and all of this other stuff. So now there's work to be done. And having
Mhm.
the recommendations that I give and putting in the hard work, it's going, okay, all right, turning off my Wi-Fi at night, or
Mhm.
putting down my phone and not looking at screens for a while to get better
Yeah.
sleep. And to make sure that they follow through with that,
Mhm.
they have to be motivated. They have to
Yeah.
go and keep that forefront,
Yeah.
what their goal is. That is so
Yeah.
very important.
Yeah. 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 I think that really stuck out to me. I once worked with a client. He was a personal trainer, he was in spectacular shape. And I said, what motivates you? Like, how do you keep at the gym? Because he had ventured on into academia, so he was no longer in that space. And his comment to me, he's like, well, I think about myself at 90 years old, and at 90, I want to be playing with my grandchildren. So every time I don't want to go to the gym, I think about, well, if I want to play with my grandchildren, I need to have mobility and strength. And therefore that gets me to the gym. And I thought that was such a beautiful thing, because this person at that point in time was not partnered. They didn't have children, they weren't close to that grandchildren, but it was still that idea, that purpose that brought them every day to the gym, and in quite spectacular shape and all the other fun things, right? They educated me more in those sessions than I think I did them. Yeah, I love that though, the crystallizing of the why and keeping that forefront. So another question for you, and perhaps I know you're so talented. I know this per se isn't going to be putting you on the spot, but I hope you can articulate kind of the reasoning behind it. A lot of people will come to me and say like, hey, so you have all my genes. Tell me the one gene that tells me I'm going to live forever or not live forever. Maybe can you speak to the idea that there's not really one singular gene, and how we go about looking at genetic data to inform about what we can know about longevity from genetic data and what we can't know? Because I think the can't know is there and people don't like that, but it is still there.
Right. And I see, that's the thing. We are in a society of that quick fix, a pill for an ill. Just give me something to make me better,
Yeah.
or to make me live forever, or just, you're right, that one thing. And to be honest, it's never just one thing.
Yeah.
And we are here on this earth to have so many experiences, and there's just so many aspects to living. Why would you want to distill it down to just one thing? That
Yeah.
the the importance of genetics, when you consider our DNA and how big it is and how complex, simplistically complex, this dichotomy of, the complexity of our bodies, but yet doing simple things can
Yeah.
make it work so beautifully.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
wonder, so Jan in the comments, and I value this, Jan in the comments has really said pointedly, like, so talk about the genes. If you had to boil it down to, so we all appreciate it's not one gene, but if you
mhm.
had to boil it down to, let's just say your top two or three, what do you think your top two or three would be? And why don't we talk about those for a
Ooh,
little bit?
okay.
Mm.
Um, I'm going to pick top ones that really work with the major concerns
Yeah,
of, of our
please.
group
I
here.
love that. I love that.
So we were talking about one of the major concerns of aging is memory decline, cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, things like that. And one of the major genes that's associated with that is the ApoE gene.
Hmm.
There has been a lot of research that has associated that particular gene with cognitive decline and Alzheimer's. And I will dive into that in a little bit, but I want to pick out some of the others.
Hmm.
I would say another major one would be the TCF7L2 gene,
Oof.
simply because when we are talking about cardiovascular health, diabetes, because really Alzheimer's is tightly associated with diabetes. Many say it is actually type 3 diabetes.
Hmm.
So looking at the TCF7L2 gene, this working with insulin. So, and your insulin response and any type of increased or decreased risk in getting type 2 diabetes.
Hmm.
I would say,
One more, and then I'll add one to the pot. And I don't think
okay,
I'm going to remind the audience, like, this is not an all-inclusive list. I think it's more
yeah.
just us arbitrarily picking some of the genes when we're meeting with someone, maybe just for an hour, what we would tend to focus on if the concern is purely longevity. Yeah.
I think my other one would actually have to be a detox pathway,
Mm, interesting. I like it.
specifically the glutathione conjugation pathway, your
Mhm.
GST genes, because I think it very important for your body to be able to detoxify efficiently and effectively in order to continue for your cells to be healthy, for the mitochondria to be working, for you to remove those toxins. Because onboard toxins, if you're not able to get rid of those and they keep reabsorbing, they can damage your
Mhm.
DNA, they can damage the cell, they can damage the tissue, and then it's kind of like everything's out the door. so,
Mhm.
so I
Mhm.
would say I'll pick those. I would love to hear what you'd like to add to that list.
I think the only other one I would add, because I think your list is pretty extensive, and I think we should offer a little bit of conversation around each of those, how you kind of interpret them, what implications they have to health. I think the only other two I would add to this list, firstly, would be 9P21, 9Peter 21, because cardiovascular issues, we know, especially within North America, are amongst the leading causes of death. Not exclusively, but they are amongst those. And so I think speaking to a gene that we've so tightly tied to cardiovascular outcomes, namely heart attack, stroke, kind of those less savory guys that everyone hears about, I think we should spend a little time on that. And then I think separately, a lot of people, at least within the news media, talk about FOXO3, right? Everyone talks about FOXO3 as this panacea of like, oh, if you have it, you're going to live forever. If not, good luck. And I wonder maybe, at the tail end of our conversation, if we can maybe demystify that a little bit, speak to the truth of what it can offer, the good of it, and then also its limitations, because I think boiling longevity down to simply that one gene or simply that one SNP isn't entirely fair. Yeah, does I think that's where I'd like to go with this conversation. I think if anyone in the chat, again, I think Dr. Lara and I are now going to jump into some of these genes. If anyone has a question around a different gene that they want to hear, please do add it into the chat or put it into the questions and answers, and we'll address it as we progress through. But why don't we start with the delight of ApoE? So what are you looking for, and why are you looking at ApoE, Dr. Lara, when you see people?
Okay, so getting to ApoE. Now, ApoE is a gene. Actually, it creates a protein that works with an LDL cholesterol. It is an LDL cholesterol, a transport gene. So now I'm sure a lot of you go, oh, I know LDL, and yeah, my numbers are too high and everything else. But
Mhm.
what exactly is that? Well, LDL is a low density lipoprotein. And what does it do? What it does is it acts like a taxi in the body, because cholesterol cannot move around the bloodstream and in the body all by itself. It needs to have a taxi. Well,
Mhm.
that's what LDLs are. This is what HDLs are. They are the taxis. So with LDL cholesterol, this is what happens is when your cardiovascular system, the endothelial lining, gets inflamed due to toxins that are present. Well, what happens is cholesterol is used as an inflammation management tool. It's like Vaseline, that protection to cover that microabrasion on the cardiovascular lining. Well, like I said, cholesterol can't move around the bloodstream by itself. So LDL, it's like, okay, taxi, come pick me up. LDL goes down to the liver, picks up the cholesterol, brings it to the site of inflammation, slathers on that cholesterol so that way it can be protected and that way it can heal. So it's not like bad cholesterol. That's unfortunately something that doctors will call it because often those numbers are very high when there's a lot of inflammation in the system.
Mhm.
When people have, higher cardiovascular issues, those numbers are higher. Well, why are they higher? Well, they're higher because more taxis are needed to get more cholesterol. More cholesterol is needed because there's more inflammation in the
Mhm.
cardiovascular system.
Mhm.
So they're only doing their jobs. It's like, don't shoot the messenger. It's so this is something that that's its job. But what we're doing is we're saying, okay, how good are those taxis though? How efficient are they in being made, in doing their jobs?
Yeah.
So I had noticed, I believe somewhere in there, someone had asked about the different numbers for ApoE. Now,
Mhm.
ApoE is different the way that it is read than other genes, because other genes you'll see in A, T, C, or G, or the 4 nucleotides that make up DNA, and that they're usually a double letter. Well, in this, you'll actually see 2 numbers. And the reason why is because there's actually, when we're looking at the chromosome, there's actually different sections. There's an ApoE2, ApoE3, ApoE4, and there's 2 different variations that we're looking at. So we look to see on which section, ApoE2, 3, or 4 it is. So depending on where that variation is, you'll get the numbers. So for example, the 2,2 gene is actually very rare. And this is something that actually I have had one client that I've ever seen have this, and where there is this genetic disorder that it is associated with, called hyperlipoproteinemia.
Oh, good job.
That's a mouthful, yes.
Good
So,
job.
but like I said, out of like hundreds of people that I have seen their DNA, I've only had one person with that particular version.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, 3,3 is the most common that I have seen. And this is a normal version. Like I said, it is the most common, and this is often associated with normal cholesterol management and function.
Mhm.
Um, 2,3, that actually is an optimal version.
Mhm.
I do have a
Rare.
handful of
So
clients. Go ahead.
yeah, it's also rare. So for those
Yeah.
who are frantically looking up their results, a majority, if not all of you, will not be 2-3, but it is the ideal form, right? So the one way you can think about it kind of with these numbers is the lower the number to an extent, the better, because it just means you're better at kind of packaging up and creating these taxis, right? There is a difference between HDL and LDL, really how well you've created or made your taxi, right? You can kind of think about the HDLs as kind of the Rolls Royces on the road, and maybe the LDLs is I don't know. I don't want to disparage a car company or betray that I don't know much about cars. Maybe the Honda Civics. I don't know. Are those still? I don't know. Whatever. Think about the expensive car compared to the not so expensive car. And then
Well,
once you kind of get up to the 4, it's kind of that car where you're praying it starts at the beginning of the day.
exactly. And, to be able to pick up the cargo and bring it, that's the important thing.
Yeah.
But you will see if you have a 4, like Dr. Krista was saying, when you start getting into those higher numbers, this is where you can have some issues. And I do have a lot of people that are 3-4. Now, this gets into
Mhm.
that less optimal profile, where the way that this would show up is that you may have more chronically high cholesterol numbers, your markers when you do your blood work, higher LDL levels, even if you are eating healthy, exercising, doing
Yeah.
all of this.
Yeah.
Again, this is a genetic predisposition that will tend to show up in that way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really the gist of the ApoE and
And
how.
the, yeah, and I think the tricky and I want to make sure we're not speeding along, but being mindful of time because we do need time for questions and answers. But and we circle back. So I think you very elegantly, beautifully described the cardiovascular impact of ApoE. Let's spend just a brief moment on the side of things that predispose towards dementia, Alzheimer's, etc., right? Because I think we'll see a lot of people, and one of the very few genes that they've heard about, again, through the news media, is ApoE, and they'll say like, oh, I know 4 is bad. If I have a 4, it means I'm going to get And let's demystify that a little bit, because there are a lot of people walking around where they do not have an ApoE4 and they have Alzheimer's. And the flip of that, there are a lot of people walking around with a 4 that do not have Alzheimer's, right? It's not fatalistic. So let's talk about first. Let's say that it's not fatalistic if you have an ApoE4. Does mean you have to live a little bit differently. But what would you do? So let's pretend you have an ApoE4. What do you do in prevention of? What do you need to be mindful of in prevention? And I think this will call up a few of our other more favored genes as well.
Yes. Well, one of the first things that you do is look at your diet. This is something
The hard work.
yeah, because really what we want to do is we want to not have the need for the taxis. So if you don't have the inflammation, or if you have very little of it, well, then we don't need a whole fleet of taxis grabbing the cholesterol. We may only need a few. And then, we can kind of help with that. So a lot of it, you have to think of prevention. So in prevention, let's lower the toxic load. And this is why I had mentioned about the detoxification pathways and, your glutathione conjugation pathway, because that really is very helpful in the cardiovascular system. So really, let's lower the need to have the taxis in the first place. So that's something I would look at. And as I said, with your food, well, there can be a lot of toxins and inflammation with certain foods when you're talking about processed foods and high omega-6 seed oils and fried foods, or foods that are like meats, proteins when they're cooked at very high heat and they're charred, and you are introducing a lot of toxins. A client of mine, beautiful phrase, control the controllables. I love that. Control the controllables. You can control what is on the end of your fork. You can control what you put into your body and on your body. So that right there. Within
if I might, I would also offer to, but don't let the controllables control you too. I think we all need to be gracious and acknowledge that every once in a while it's really good and healthy to have certain indulgences, right? We're not telling the alcoholic to go have an occasional drink, but we are saying that, in order to live a good life, right? We look at blue zone areas. So for people's edification, when we talk about blue zone, we're talking about areas of the world where people live into their hundreds, but the qualifier here, they live happily and healthily into their 100s, right? These aren't people kind of sitting on the bed, praying for another day. These are people who are still up and active, right? And in almost all of those cultures, vices, so be that a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of staying out too late, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, all of those things are within those cultures. They are just not things that are the focal point and an everyday thing. So I like the control the controllables, but don't let the controllables control you either, because you want to be happy and joyful in the time that you're living.
And the thing is, when you live for the majority of the time a good, healthy lifestyle, getting the good sleep, good food, it provides you more of wiggle room to indulge every once in a while in these things and not have it affect you so profoundly. You are able to recover much more quickly, much more readily, as far as, and much more fully. So it is truly finding that balance of living that good, healthy life, but also enjoying it, at certain times. That's the key. So absolutely.
Yeah. So how would you fold in? So with this awareness that ApoE can predispose a little bit to Alzheimer's, right? And we're starting to call Alzheimer's, diabetes type 3. How would you fold something like TCF7L2 into this? So why don't you talk about what that gene is and how you would fold that into kind of the larger understanding that we've established so far?
Okay, so talking about TCF7L2, this is a protein that works with insulin and its ability to do its job. and whether you could be more susceptible to insulin resistance. Now, what exactly does that mean? Well, first of all, insulin. The job of insulin is to open the door to a cell and let glucose in.
The
That
delicious,
is,
delicious sugar.
yes, that is a sensitive TCF7L2 insulin protein. He is sensitive to the glucose and says, hey, come on in, let's get you in the cell, let's get that cell some energy. Because glucose is very necessary to make ATP, the energy currency of the cell. There's a lot of things that the cell needs it for, but it has to get in there. Now, when you have insulin insensitivity, this means that he's not going to be opening up the door for the glucose. It ends up staying in the blood. And that's why when you get your blood work, even fasting, can be 90s, 100, 110, 120, even higher. And that's because the sugar, that glucose, is staying in the bloodstream instead of getting into the cells where it's needed.
Yeah.
So that's really the basis of the job of it.
Yeah. And I think the unintended consequence of that. And so if the sugar is just hanging out in the blood, I mean, this is a cross metaphor, but sugar is sticky, right? And so it's just, if you have too much, it's just going to stick to places. And we all know that when you have sugar on a counter that's sticking there, you're going to attract unsavory things. You're going to be attracting ants and you're going to attract all the dirt that's just going to stick there, right? And so when you have too much sugar going around in your body in a long-standing way, it effectively sticks within the body and creates some gunk, creates some inflammation. And so in particular, what we're seeing is it will stick around in the brain a little bit too long. It'll clog things up and then lend to the more complicated and increased picture of cognitive decline, of Alzheimer's, kind of all of these unsavory things that we hear about in older age that we're all, I think, seeking to mitigate, right? So TCF7L2 is kind of one of the ways that you'll have insight into, are you someone that needs to be more vigilant around blood sugars, right? The person who really truly only gets to have it as a treat, as opposed to someone who might have a bit more flexibility, right? Like when I think of genes and leveraging your genes for a personalized longevity plan, right? The goal, at least for me, I'll be very plain, is to be as lazy as possible. I'm very lazy when it comes to my health. I try to do the smallest things that give me the best outcome. So if you have really great TCF7L2 genes, it's not saying you get permission to eat all the sugar. It's saying maybe you focus your health energy elsewhere. You still have to be mindful of your sugar intake, but there might be other low-hanging fruit. That's a better thought for you. Do you agree with that, Laura? Are you lazy when it comes to your own healthcare?
Yes. I have to admit, I don't like going to a gym. I do. I've been really good, actually. I want to know how you've been doing going to the gym, because I have been going to the gym. I don't really like it, but I go. So,
yeah.
but even then, I want to get the most out of the shortest amount of time possible. I mean, really, I don't want to be spending, 2 hours, running on a treadmill and lifting weights and doing that if I can do something in 15 minutes and, benefit my body. So, because there are other things that I want to do, like learning more and helping more people out there learn about their health. So.
Yeah, and how I'm curious because I hope we're not jumping around from topic to topic too much, but part of my goal is to kind of address all the genes that we've spoken about so far, and one that we haven't spoken to directly yet is going to be 9p21. So I wonder, first of all, before you detail what 9p21 is, maybe you detail how 9p21 informs the type of exercise that you're doing, because mobility is something we need to be mindful of. And we know categorically, the more you move, the more you're working out, the more you're using your body, the better it is for health outcomes. But how do you leverage your DNA to know what exercise is best for you and how to be lazy about your exercise?
Well, when you're looking at your 9p21 gene, you will see that there's a number and the letter G. That's because The way I tell people, it's not a typical SNP, a single nucleotide polymorphism we're looking at. It actually is a chromosome locus. It's a section of that chromosome, and we're looking at 3 spots on it.
Correct.
So really, it's what I tell people is that it's like driving down a street. And because we have 2 chromosomes, we have 2 parallel streets we're driving down. And so the 3 spots we're looking at, it's like you're looking at 3 houses on each street. And I say, okay, of those 3 houses, so 6 total, we want to find out if those houses have black shutters, if they have G alleles. Because if they do, that means that the house can burn down more readily. You can become inflamed more easily in the presence of toxins.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, when you're counting those houses to see how many have black shutters,
Mm-hmm.
or there are with black shutters, the more sensitive you are for inflammation. So therefore, you can have anywhere from 0 to 6 Gs for your 9p21. So if you have 0 Gs, that's like stainless steel. You do not become inflamed very easily at all. That's wonderful for you because oxygen can create oxidants and cause inflammation in the cardiovascular system. And what do we get a lot of when we are doing cardiovascular exercises? A lot of oxygen, but also creating a lot of oxidants. And there are other toxins that are present and that come through metabolism. So the lower the number, the more cardiovascular exercise you can handle. So if you have like a 0, 1, or 2, yeah, you could probably do marathon running and, actually, overall do pretty well. I mean, obviously there are other genes involved, and I'm not going to throw it just on one gene. So I will say that, but generally that is one of the major ones that we look at for that. If you are someone like me who has 5 houses with black shutters, okay, I become inflamed much more readily.
Yeah.
Marathon running is not my friend. I actually always liked sprints, short bursts, and I am much better at weight-bearing exercises, weight resistant. So, that's one of the things that you can look at in your genes to determine, to help you determine the type of exercise regimen that you should be doing.
Yeah. And I would offer too, because I think we see, at least I see within my consults, a lot of people who are high performers, be that in the corporate space or in the athletic space. And I always keep in mind this. I had a fellow once who across the board, both from his 9p21 and then separately detox and kind of all the other genes, he was the sort of person that, should not go outside, just didn't have great detox, didn't have great cardiovascular capacity. And yet he was a marathon runner, and he was someone who was competitive in the bodybuilding space. Like he was kind of doing all the things. And what I was talking with him, what we really learned about him was he was totally aware he was more sensitive to things, but he was doing things very proactively to mitigate that because his passion was running and bodybuilding. So he didn't let that stop him, but he put a lot of energy and effort into the recovery, into balancing the genes there, right? And again, I think, as we think about how do we form up our longevity plan, it's really ensuring we are not beholden exclusively to our genes, more that we understand them and then act accordingly based on what we want, based on that why that we talked about at the top of the hour. Why? What are you doing with your health? What are you enjoying with your health? Yeah.
It's really leveraging the information, the knowledge. Here you are being given, a hand of cards. But in order for you to play them, first of all, you have to know the game. You have to know the rules to be able to play that game. And it seems like that the client you were working with, not only did he know his hand well, but he knew how to play the game. He knew really how to leverage that information to work it in his best interest so he could do what brings joy to him.
Yeah, I like that. And so I wonder, I want to make sure we shift over to question and answer because I see quite a few. And But before that, Lara, if I had to put you on the spot and ask for a 2-minute summary of FOXO3 before we move on, because I think we would be remiss to kind of have a whole session on the genetics of longevity and not talk about the media's darling that is FOXO3. So, and I'm gonna time box you a little.
Okay.
What is FOXO3? And then kind of what do you see as its limitations? Because right now the media puts it through as if you have this, you're going to live forever.
All right. So again, FOXO3
So
words here,
close.
known as the longevity gene. But what it really does is it influences the antioxidation cellular pathways. Okay. It helps to initiate DNA repair. Because every time our cells split, it is making, a copy of the DNA. So we want to make sure that that DNA, that the fidelity, that copy is beautiful. So FOXO3 helps in that. But again, the word is helps. It's not like it controls the whole thing. It also works on to kill off dying cells. It helps, those senescent cells that are just kind of hanging around, those zombie cells, to get them cleared out of the way. It helps to respond to inflammation. It also helps to maintain stem cell production, because in all of our tissues, there are little niches. There are these little sections that have stem cells that are ready to be recruited and then, grow into healthier cells of that tissue. It also helps with attacking infectious organisms. So this really works into the immune system. So it really is a shiny player, on the team that helps with the body, that ultimately works into longevity. So like I tell all of my clients, genes do not exist in a vacuum. And just like we can look at one particular player on a team, say a hockey player, and you're looking at his stats and everything, he doesn't play the game alone. He plays on the entire team. So we have to remember to zoom out and see what else is going on and how these genes are affected through epigenetics, through what we eat, what we drink, what we breathe, how we sleep. All of these things will affect how these genes, including FOXO3, how it is expressed in the body and how well it's doing its job.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and so for people, as far as if you're quickly looking at your particular gene for FOXO3, so the TT version is a normal longevity version. Actually, that's the one that I happen to have. If you have a G in there, that actually is associated with advanced longevity. So GG would be considered the ultimate, in longevity gene.
Yeah, and I think the qualifier for this, I think most population studies have been done on Caucasian, European Caucasian. So there's still a little bit of learning and diversity that needs to go into FOXO3 for other populations. So just awareness for the audience, because I know we have people tuning in from all over the world, and both Canada and America have quite a beautiful makeup of people from around the world. Yeah. So on that note, why don't we start jumping into some questions and answers? We are going to do our best within the next 20 minutes or so to answer these. Those that we don't get around to, though, we'll make sure that through some forum, we'll get back to you with some answers. I believe there's a few Facebook groups that we can reply to these questions within. So the first question is from Barbara, and very rarely does the first question lend so perfectly to how do we kick off these questions. And so, Barbara, thank you for this question. She asks, how do you know what to focus on first? I have been adding in the recommended vitamins, working on sleep, exercise, inflammation and detox seems important. So Barbara, we're going to assume, at least for the sake of this discussion, there's no overt disease or nothing wrong per se. You're just looking for general longevity, or kind of how do I begin a healthcare plan if nothing's wrong, but how do I optimize and offer to longevity? And I'm sure every practitioner has a different answer to this. Dr. Lara, if Barbara was in front of you, what would you say to her? What would you recommend? Where do you start with most of your clients, assuming there's nothing, no pathology that needs addressing?
I would be asking a lot of questions. I am a
Mhm.
very, very curious practitioner. um, because, when you say, oh, I eat a healthy diet, well, what do you
Mhm.
consider healthy? Oh, I sleep all right. I sleep
Okay.
well. Well, what does that mean to you? I mean, how many hours do you wake up at the night? Do you have a sleep tracker that actually gives you objective data, you know, to see how much deep sleep you're getting? Which, by the way, deep sleep is very important when it comes to mental cognition and not having Alzheimer's. There's a wonderful studies that have been done and is talked about by Dr. Matthew Walker in his book, Why We Sleep. So,
Mhm.
but I have the person in front of me, and generally when I do, they've already filled out a quite extensive intake form. So I do have a lot of information to work off of at first, but then I still get very curious asking questions. So usually the first session, I'm getting to know the person sitting in front of me. I mean, I would love to say, oh, yes, start with this. But that depends.
Yeah.
That depends
Yeah.
on who is sitting in front of me. And also, what they say, the types of things are, oh, yeah, I sleep fine, I do this. But when you really start asking the questions, then you start getting and hearing where there are some,
Mhm.
maybe a little bit of an issue. Oh, well, yeah, actually, my sleep, I wake up in the middle of the night and it's hard for me to fall back to sleep. Or yeah, I'll sleep okay, but I get up, I just feel so tired.
Mhm.
That starts giving me clues into where to start.
I like that. I like that. And I think in particular, I think there's always a hope that there's this kind of one size fits all when it comes to healthcare. And so we all, and as a practitioner, I'm sure you feel this too, Dr. Lara, you always want to say, here's the thing, and let me share it with everyone. We all can be the same. And it's just not true. I think though, if I had to offer most general advice that wasn't per se exceptionally personalized, I always start with sleep in these sorts of things. And the reason being, I think if your sleep isn't on point, you're kind of starting your day off at a little bit of a disadvantage. You're not necessarily going to have the cognitive power or the willpower or any of the powers that be. And so, regardless kind of what the underlying things that genetically speaking we should be working on, maybe it needs to be sugar, maybe it needs to be better exercise, whatever it is. If we're not starting off with a good foundation of sleep, it's harder to bring some of those things in. So, I fully agree with what you're saying here in the sense that we need to know the person. But I think oftentimes sleep is still where I'll start with because that enables them to then carry through with whatever it is we're talking about. But I love that. Okay, let's see here. The next question that we have here, and this is, hold on one second. This is from Nicole, and I'll offer a quick answer to this. So Nicole says, what if you have ApoE24? Is that kind of like ApoE44, 34, whatever it is? So Nicole, ApoE2/4 is a very rare presentation. It's not common. So a lot of what I'm going to say right now is more based off of case study of it, meaning there's not large populations like most people are 3-3. We can easily study them. There's not large populations of 2-4 that we can study. This said, when we look at the smaller data, when we look at the populations of people with 2-4, they tend, from a presentation perspective, to look very similar to 3-3s, the average case. So there's no increased presentation per se of kind of blood dysregulation because the 2 almost balances the 4, right? The 2 is that guy that processes better, 4 not so much. And when it comes to Alzheimer's, I believe that the risk, around that 4 is to an extent the same as having the 4 allele, but has not been proven off to be better or worse, possibly a little bit on the better side. There's less occurrence, but not really the numbers within those populations to study. So I hope that's helpful because it's a relatively unique presentation. but studies are pointing towards something similar to 3-3. Okay. Let's see here. The next question I have, okay, it's for Nancy. It's another APOE question. So she's saying she has APOE 3-4, so that 4 problematic allele. She's saying that neither of her parents have ever had cognitive issues, only heart and very late in life. Does that make sense? So Dr. Lara, does that make sense to you? And I guess, can you offer a little bit of context there to Nancy and possibly to other people that are sitting there and like, ooh, I have a 4. What does this mean? Is it inevitable?
Honestly, no, it's not inevitable. And this is the beauty of having that knowledge, is to be able to do the things necessary to be a part of that percent that doesn't get it but has that particular variant. So later, having those issues later in life, yes, that does make sense, because it is called allostatic load. As you go through your life, you are building upon these stresses. We're talking physical, chemical, emotional, all of these different pressures in your body, from traumas to exposure to like things like glyphosate, and all of these different toxins in the body that build up, and as they are building up, that is called your allostatic load. So obviously, the longer you're on this earth, the more in the higher your allostatic load is. So yes, that's why we see many of these conditions as people age, or if they are acutely exposed to certain toxins, whether they're drinking water that has hexavalent chromium, and bathing in it, going back to the Erin Brockovich movie from years ago, with that particular toxin in the water. So obviously, people with more acute exposures will have issues. But for heart conditions, but not dementia, okay, so this would be, I would suspect that they had some issues in their cardiovascular profile where they were more sensitive to the inflammation, maybe not such great detoxification pathways. They aren't clearing it as well. And so they were having some heart issues, but it may not directly affect the brain. To say they slept well, or were doing other things, or had a particular profile, or they had an optimal TCF7L2 or some other gene profile that helped in that area. I mean, a lot of this is supposition and hypothesis, but I can definitely see how that could happen. So
yeah, there's always such the huge variable of how you live your life, right? I think you and I have been in practice long enough where we've seen a lot of profiles where a person has all the wrong genes and yet they're doing a-okay, and then the converse of someone who has all the great genes but not doing so well. There's such a variable as to how you live your life, and that's part of the goal. I think a lot of people come to us and they're like, hey, you do this really sexy stuff with genes and tell me how to live forever. And so much of our advice still boils back down to sleep well, eat well, laugh well, and live well, right? Yeah. The next question I have here is a fun one. So Mary is asking, she says her reports, her DNA 360 notes that she has zinc that doesn't bind properly within the beta pancreas cells, so she doesn't absorb zinc very well. I believe it's SLC30A7.
30A.
A. So close.
30A8. There you go.
There we go. So close. One number off. I'll take it. And this, she's saying it can result in bad insulin sensitivity problems, and this more gets to part of the creation, and the pancreas will leverage zinc amongst other things to support insulin and other sorts of productions. She takes zinc in compensation of this, but she's still showing that she's spiking her sugars on her continuous glucose monitor, even with kind of safe or like foods that shouldn't otherwise spike. Is this then attributable to the TCF7L2 gene? Dr. Lara, I have some thoughts. Where would you like to start with some of your thoughts?
The TCF7L2 gene could play a factor in that, yes. I mean, she doesn't say what she has in there, but the thing is that you say safe foods. Well, it could be safe in general, but maybe not safe for you.
Mhm.
And this is taking you as the individual, where some people can eat grapes. You think, oh, well, this is fruit. This is, good. And their blood sugar is stabilized. But other people, it will spike 40 points or something, and not come down. So it's a matter of testing. Take yourself as your own N of one. Don't think of, oh, well, this is safe foods. It shouldn't, but yet it is. You can't change the fact of the numbers that are on there. So try the different foods, stay away from the ones that are, really spiking your blood sugar, go to
Mhm.
the ones that are not. But even then, there are other things that you can do. Things like drinking some, like a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar in water before you eat. That helps to stabilize, as does cinnamon, depending on as long as you're not sensitive to cinnamon. Also, the order of foods that you eat. Eating your high fibrous foods like a salad first, then eating your fat and proteins, then the carbohydrates, that more of the starches if you are having starches. But honestly, if you are having that much of an issue, I actually would remove starches for a while and see about, stabilizing your blood sugar.
Yeah.
Also going for a walk after you eat. Your muscles are sugar sinks. They will absorb and take up that sugar because it wants that for fuel. So, that will help to stabilize your blood sugar as well. So there are other things you can do other than just the foods that you are eating.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I would also offer to take a look at your AMY1, AMY1. So this is something, this gene looks at an enzyme that comes out of salivary glands. It's called amylase. It helps us with the digestion of our sugars. And people who are poor in this presentation, so an AG or an AA presentation, they will, or sorry, an AT or an AA presentation. I'm mixing up my letters. There's a lot of them. They do not, especially initially, manage their blood sugar right away very well. So they'll eat something and they'll spike, but then insulin is able to compensate for it after the fact. So it's very specific to this AMY1 presentation. And so often they'll see a momentary spike and then they'll level out. And it's not something per se that lends to longer term risk of diabetes, assuming all things within the diet are well. It's just kind of one of those nuances that now that we have the technology and we can track in such a different way, we just didn't know this before. But I would really encourage you to, if you're always seeing these spikes and the concern, make sure you're monitoring all of this with a doctor, with various blood work, and that you are responding appropriately, because we want to know, if it's not diet based, if there's other reasons for it, other inflammatory reasons, other systemic reasons, that those are being addressed, right? Don't try and manage your blood sugar just by yourself. We really do encourage that you see a healthcare provider, because the advice we're offering is not comprehensive. We don't know your health history. It's just some thoughts around genes, not a well-informed picture. So make sure you're engaging with your doctor there. Yeah. All right, I like this next question because I think it kind of dovetails off the last one where we said it's not just insulin that's going to be managing your blood sugar, it's also that movement, right? As you move, you quite literally open up those doors, let the sugar into the cells. So Sheldon is asking, any other genes besides 9p21 that you look at for mobility, flexibility, and exercise? So kind of this longevity goal of, when I get to the beautiful age of 90, like one of my clients who thinks about playing with his grandchildren. How do you go? What are other things that we would look at in a profile to kind of support how you go about movement and supporting exercise profiles?
well, a few of the genes that we look at when it comes to muscle building, muscle retention is really looking into your hormone profile. And specifically looking at the gene, it's a CYP17A1. This gene actually informs us how quickly you convert progesterone into testosterone. So because it tells us, how much testosterone do you have? And that helps to inform us your particular hormone profile, whether you are a dominant or a balanced profile. Something else that we look at is how quickly do you clear your androgens, these testosterone. So this would be your UGT genes. This is the glucuronidation pathway. And because that tells us if you clear very quickly, it's going to take a lot of the stores of the testosterone and will leave you with a lower concentration. So if you have 2 copies, that means you clear much more quickly as compared to if you have 0, then you clear it very slowly. Another one that we look at is the AR gene, which is called, it stands for androgen receptor. And this is the receptor on the cells in the tissues where the testosterone binds. And how well does it do that? So if you do this very well, then it's easier for you to utilize the testosterone you have. And that basically says, oh, I can use the testosterone and I can build muscle. I can have the energy that I want much more easily, much more efficiently than if you have a suboptimal version or a version where you're not binding it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So those are ones in particular that we look at when it comes to muscle health and also, well, and I mean, it's really the whole profile, but those are some highlights.
Yeah. All right. The next question I have here is a double header from Lindy. I hope I'm saying that right, Lindy. She is saying that she has ApoE44 and both of her parents have and had it. Her father passed away. Our condolences. It's a tricky thing. She says she's very sensitive to mold and that supplemental GLUT, has helped her a lot in regards to losing weight, eating clean, air purifiers, et cetera, et cetera. She's asking if we test that pathway and just kind of other context around it. And I don't think we'll offer a fulsome answer here. So GLUT is looking at one of the glucose transporters within the cell. It's a target for several drugs that are very popular within the news media right now for either supporting diabetes or separate to that, supporting some weight loss outcomes. And a lot of people are looking to them to reduce weight, to reduce glucose, to kind of be this drug that will offer longevity and health. And I would offer, we don't really have time in this webinar to explore it. That's a very nuanced, complex conversation. I will ask that be within the chat and possibly directly communicating with Lindy and others. We are hosting a webinar or conversation on this in the coming weeks because many people are asking this, and it's a very nuanced, complicated conversation that is not so easy as to say yes or no. So I'll allow B or Beth to kind of put that information within the chat. So hopefully you can join us. Everyone here is absolutely invited to that conversation, assuming my voice holds out. And if you are unable to join because it conflicts with your schedule, whatever that might be, it will be recorded and we'll ensure that you get access to that replay link so that we can more fully, honestly, transparently have that conversation as opposed to a very quick, unfair answer here. But I think there's a lot to be had in the conversation of glucose regulation and pharmaceuticals that support it. There's a lot of great things that are coming from these drugs and a lot of not so great things. And we want to make sure we have time for all the nuances that are there. All right. Oops. Oh dear. Dr. Lara, I wonder, we're starting to get to the end of our time, guys. I think we might be able to answer one more question before we'll have to kind of save the balance of these questions for another day. Kelly in particular, Kelly, you dropped a question in here regarding your twin. If you could also just put in your contact information, I have an answer for you and I'm happy to share that with you. And anyone else who's kind of within the chat, we'll make sure we take your information so we can offer in a form accessible answers to this. The last question we have here, Dr. Lara, and I know how much you love sleep and speaking to the various stages of it. So I wonder for Lydia, if you can offer, what is the ideal window of time for deep sleep per night? So why don't you talk a little bit about what deep sleep is? You know, you mentioned it in particular for longevity, the benefits it confers, and then ideally how much, how long, when, all the fun things.
Okay, so deep sleep, love deep sleep because this is the time that the body repairs. It really is cleaning and clearing, not just in the gut, but in the brain. This is the time that your glymphatic system is really doing its job. The glymphatic system being the sister to the lymphatic system, that is the body. The lymphatic system is of the brain, of the head. The glial cells will actually shrink up to 60% their size. So you get a nice dishwashing effect, cleaning out any junk that can be in and around the brain and removing those proteins that can tend to deposit and actually be associated with Alzheimer's itself. So that's what happens during deep sleep, along with just a wonderful time for your body to finish that repair. Now, when you're talking about if you have a sleep tracker, like an Aura Ring or one of those other beautiful technologies that when you're saying, well, how much deep sleep is good? And generally, if you can get between like an hour and a half to even 2.5 hours, that is amazing. So, I mean, really, you want to have your deep sleep be around 20 to 23% of your overall sleep time. Um, so now there's a little bit of nuance as far as like when, because sleep is actually broken up into sections. Generally, it's about like an average, about 90 minutes in sections, where when you first go to sleep, you're in deep sleep, then you come up and are in, say, REM or light sleep, and then up, and then back down and deep sleep. And you'll see generally about 4 segments. Earlier in the night, when you first go to bed, your deep sleep is, you're going to have more of it, less REM. As the night goes on and into the morning, you'll have less deep sleep segments and longer REM segments. So if you were to, say, have an ideal average going to bed at, say, 10 o'clock and waking up at, say, 6 o'clock, that gives you that nice 8 hours. Okay, you may not be asleep the whole time, but being in bed, and if you can get, say, 7.5 hours, of actual sleep time, that's wonderful. And then you would probably follow generally that segmented sleep type that I was talking about. But say you were to go to bed at 2 o'clock in the morning and then try to sleep until, say, 9, you are actually going to lose some of that time of deeper sleep. You're not going to have as much of it. There is that circadian rhythm that we have to pay homage to, that everyone has in their cells. And this is one of the problems for people who work on swing shifts, and why their health, oftentimes declines when they do, work these strange shifts. And again, Dr. Matthew Walker dives into this beautifully in his book. So I do recommend, if you'd like to learn more about your sleep, please check out Why We Sleep by Dr. Matthew Walker. So really that works into the sectioning of deep sleep and how much overall. And there are tips and ways to get better deep sleep. So, there's a lot of different things, which I know we are running out of time, but you could always, write questions, go to our Facebook group, and, we will be talking more about this. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, at least we have many different time zones that we're spanning here, but especially for those Eastern time zone or more east, this is hopefully inspirational to kind of start thinking about winding down and getting ready for bed and really setting yourself up for success. It's tricky. I think in the Western world, we want to live longer, and we have, from food, access to food and nutritional information, health information, we have this potential, but the world isn't necessarily set up in a way that favors health practices, sleep especially, right? I think it's shocking the number or the lack thereof sleep that people are getting and how important it is, given it's one of that times where your brain squeegees itself up and cleans up. So I hope if nothing else, as we close up our time, you're inspired maybe to consider some of your sleep habits and to start shifting some things within your world, be it diet, be it sleep, be it exercise, some beautiful little things that hopefully will beget better longevity. I want to take a moment just to thank Dr. Lara for offering your time and insight and guidance here. We're so grateful to have you consulting with our clients here at the DNA Company, and I'm very grateful, given I last minute jumped into this, your forethought about what should be considered this evening as we talk about how do we not only live, in a longer way, but in a more meaningful and healthy and happy way. So thank you so very much. Any closing thoughts before we bid our audience adieu?
First of all, I would like to say again, thank you everyone for being here, for taking the time out to continue to learn about genes, about yourself, about the things you can do to be healthier. That is wonderful, taking that step, putting forth the effort and the energy is absolutely fantastic. And I applaud each and every one of you. So thank you. And Dr. Krista, thank you very much for being here and helping host this. You are always such a delight. And with wonderful information. I mean, we could just talk for hours and hours, exploring all of these different things. But this is why we do as many webinars as we do and the podcasts. And I do encourage you, everyone, to look back and get some insight on some of the other wonderful information that we have talked about in previous webinars and in the future webinars. Definitely keep an eye out. So outside of that, I would say when it comes to longevity, know your why. What gives you that spark, that tingle in your body that helps you to push through the times that you just want to pull the covers back over your head, hit the snooze and go, I don't want to move. But that instead goes, you know what? Even though I don't want to move, I'm going to get up. I am going to exercise. I'm going to eat right. I'm going to breathe. I am going to find joy and gratefulness in my day because of feeling. So find your joy.
I love that. I love that so very much. And I think on that beautiful note, the note of finding the why behind why you offer energy and effort to your health, that is where we will leave everyone. I see in the chat for people who had follow-up questions, I see that we're collecting your emails. And so thank you everyone who's here, that is participating, who cares about their health and who wants to sit in community, right? We know community is one of the things that will lend to longevity, independent of whatever genes it is you might have. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for your questions. And we will see you a different bat time, a bit different bat night. For the Adam West fans out there, I applaud you. For the non-Adam West fans, we'll see you at a different time and space. We'll see you guys later. Au revoir.